I'm not a political science. I do not work on cultural relations. I'm an experimental linguist by training, but I define myself as a cognitive scientist because I work on multilingualism in the brain, both from a neuroscientific point of view and from a behavioral point of view. So it won't come as a surprise to hear that I'm going to talk about the importance of languages for cultural relations. Also because language is not something that usually appears in discourse and narratives about cultural relations or cultural diplomacy for that matter. So this is, for example, drawn from EU documents on cultural relations and diplomacy. So they mention, yes, cultural diversity is an integral part of the values of the European Union, and the EU is strongly committed to promoting the global order based on peace, rules of law, freedom of expression, multiple understanding, and respect of fundamental rights. And this involves a commitment to promoting international cultural relations and supporting the promotion of the diverse cultures of EU member states. No mention of language at all. But this is typical of policies and narratives in other fields. So we're working with the Scottish Government at the moment on refugees policies, and typically language is also not mentioned there, which I think is it's something that really should be there. When we talk about language, we're not just talking about English. I live in a country which is, we'll come back to this, proudly monolingual. Well, not so proudly sometimes, but still essentially monolingual. And so, for example, William Hague, who used to be former Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, said at one point, we have some immense assets and advantages in the area of relations between nations, international courts of public opinion, and international negotiation tables. For example, the English language connecting us to billions of people. So the idea is that, yes, we speak English, other people should speak English, and we're all happy. And this is what I would call privileged monolingualism of countries like the UK. And we know that the UK has the worst language skills of the whole European Union. And this costs, actually, it's a tax that costs a huge amount to the UK economy. It's been calculated around 48 billion pounds a year, right, for lack of language skills. Nevertheless, so multilingualism continues to be undervalued because people with language skills are often seen as language specialists, or more often even translators or interpreters. They're not considered for the skills that they bring to their job. And this applies to business, for example, the private sector, but also many other sectors. And now we're approaching, well, I hope we're not approaching, but we're approaching the date set for Brexit. And what we see already is a fall, a decline in language enrollment, which were very, very, very low even up to now. But definitely, language learning plummets, putting up Brexit language barriers, etc., etc. So the situation is getting worse already, even before Brexit formally happens. Now, I'm not going to talk about Brexit. I'm going to talk about the challenging question today. And the challenging question is, what is the relationship between a multilingual brain and cultural relations? So, so I hope I'm going to say something that you didn't know, or maybe you read about these things. And we know, for example, that language learning does change the brain. And there's plenty of evidence of this, both at the anatomical level. So there is extra growth of language cortex in certain brain areas as a response of learning another language. At the level of connectivity, so there are more connections within the brain when you learn another language. Now, if that was the whole story, you would say, well, what does that mean for cultural relations? what does it mean more general for behavior? And this is, where I'm going. So language learning actually changes behavior in very interesting ways. So, I would like to clear the ground from a typical misunderstanding that you'll find around, especially if you read the media. The media have actually given some space to these effects or benefits of bilingualism, often in the wrong way. So, for example, the misconception that bilingualism can make you smarter, we can say straight away that this is not true. We don't become little Einsteins or geniuses, by learning languages, but we do have, we can get a series of benefits that I'm going to illustrate, some of which are relevant for cultural relations, I think, and these benefits can be found over the lifespan. So there are obvious benefits of learning a language. I think nobody would disagree with. Yes, you learn languages, you can communicate with more people, you can understand the cultures that lie behind languages, because there's a culture behind every language. But I'm going to talk about the less obvious effects. And in order to do that, I'm going to give you a very, very short tour of research. So for one thing, language learning improves your language skills. Again, we're perhaps in the domain of the obvious here. If you know other languages, you have a more natural understanding of how language works in general. And this starts from children. If children are lucky enough to learn a language when they're children, they actually understand how language works, not in the sense of language rules, being able to state what we typically learn in a classroom context. I'm talking about spontaneous understanding of languages and better ability to become biliterate. So, learning also to read and write in another language, and better language learning skills. So the more languages you know, the easier it becomes to learn other languages compared to a monolingual person. Now, outside the domain of language, this is the first very interesting property that happens when you are multilingual. So you are better aware of other people's perspectives. Not only that, but you are more ready to adopt the other person's perspective. In other words, to switch from your own perspective to the perspective of somebody else. There is a developmental benefit of this in children. So all children have to decentralize, right? Young children are naturally egocentric. They think they're the center of the world. They slowly understand that not everybody can share their perspective, either visual or mental perspective. A bilingual gets there earlier in developmental terms. So a bilingual child actually understands this better earlier. And a bilingual and multilingual adult is faster at switching from their own perspective and to embracing the other person's perspective. There's plenty of experimental evidence. If you're curious, I can tell you how we study these things. But this is very important. Where does it come from? It comes from the experience of understanding that not everybody is bilingual and choosing the right language depending on who you're talking to. Okay? Because obviously, if you're talking, you very soon understand that I don't really speak German, so there's no point in speaking German to me, right? And that's what happens, from early childhood. So the basis of this, and also having two words for the same object, that is another characteristic that leads to this better appreciation and better readiness to put yourself into other people's shoes. There are benefits for attention and flexibility. So what do we mean by this? I mean the ability to pay attention in a focused way, disregarding irrelevant information. So that is one side of attention that has been found to be enhanced by multilingualism, but also a better flexibility at adapting to different circumstances and a better ability to deal with conflicting information. Now, we're getting to the territory where, we all have interest, right? So, ability to deal with conflict in a participative way, and ability to focus on what matters, disregarding what doesn't matter. Again, that comes apparently from the fact that when you're a bilingual, and all of us are here, all your languages are simultaneously active. So you can't switch off a language in the morning because we don't need it today, right? So I'm speaking English to you, but my Italian, which is my native language, and the other languages I know, are very much active, and my brain is pushing them away so that they don't interfere too heavily with my English. So that language experience is generalized outside the language domain and brings better flexibility in dealing with general situations. Just to give you an example of cognitive control, how bilinguals are less distracted by irrelevant information. This is a very famous task. This is the easy condition. You simply have to read the words, right? Blue, yellow, red, purple, black. Now comes the interesting condition. You have to name the color of the ink in which the word is written. So you have to say yellow, but the word says blue. You have to say red, but the word says yellow. And you can't help reading it because we are illiterate, right? A pre-literate child would do very well at this because they don't have any interference. Bilinguals are better at resisting the interference effect from reading, automatic reading the word. Okay? So this is just one of the many examples that we could give. Decision making. There is an area of research that shows that actually foreign language speakers are better than monolinguals at making rational decisions. Now, we mentioned emotionality in different. We mentioned emotionality. Now it's working, right? Yeah. For that long. Okay. Emotionality, right? As part of these populist, nationalist, movements. Apparently, rationality is easier if you know more than one language, and particularly if you make decisions in a non-native language, which happens to more and more people, right? I mean, think of the EU, how many people, work in English, French, or German, the three official languages, when their native language is a different one, right? So we have more and more people who actually participate in the decisional process in a language that is not their native language. So apparently there's better control of heuristic bases or biases that lead to emotional reactions. So the message is that, it doesn't really matter which languages, by the way, because it's not just prestigious languages that give you these advantages. What matters is the fact of having more than one language in the brain. No matter whether they're spoken, by billions of people around the world, or only by, 50 lucky people on an island, right? It doesn't matter. It's the fact of having more than one language in the brain that gives you these benefits. And so there are no useful or useless languages from a cognitive point of view. Although clearly people have very clear ideas about the languages that matter and the languages that don't matter, and we are facing that all the time. Now, coming back to cultural relations, and of course my limited understanding of what cultural relations are, because I'm not working in this area, but it seems to me that there are some very interesting and significant impacts on cultural relations. So we want to distinguish perhaps between cultural relations and cultural diplomacy, and all of us, it seems to be clear here, we are more concerned with cultural relations as intercultural dialogue, understanding among people, rather than cultural diplomacy that tends to be more instrumental to governments, to relationships among governments and states, and that's where the notion of soft power, which I'm coming back to in a moment, actually makes more sense. But both cultural relations and cultural diplomacy actually can benefit from some of the aspects of multilingualism that that I illustrated, because cultural relations obviously involve understanding of people, right, in order to generate goodwill, genuine goodwill, and if you want, influence abroad, if you're using terms soft power, but without government intervention. So these cultural exchanges are ultimately based on the ability, for example, to take another person's perspective and understand it better. There is specificity to cultural relations. I've been reading a document jointly produced by the British Council and the Goethe Institute. So specific to cultural relations in these two countries. And the document points out that cultural relations are in part based on the wider, I can use this now, yes, the wider history of countries. And so understanding these differences is crucial to mutual understanding and reciprocity, right? Again, we are making the same point. So the way the document explains this is that German cultural relations, for example, are founded on a strong conception of culture, where culture is closely tied to history, language, and identity, whereas British cultural relations are based on a weaker or weak conception of culture, emerging from liberal individualism, British empiricism, and so on. So understanding, if you're doing cultural relations, if you're working in this area, also understanding the specificity implies really getting out of your familiar, turf and being able to appreciate the specificity that you're dealing with. Soft power is often mentioned, and I think, the way I've been reading about this, soft power is more related to cultural diplomacy than to cultural relations. But some of the abilities that I mentioned are critical to soft power, the way it's normally defined. So in Nye's word, Nye was the guy who actually proposed the concept, as you know, soft power refers to the ability to persuade others through attraction rather than coercion or payment. So this is not what we see in the rise of these nationalist, populist movements, where they seem to be, they're not particularly interested in attracting, persuading through attraction. So I don't think that soft power really applies, to those areas. But given that multilinguals are potentially better at evaluating different arguments, understanding what is attractive to others, because they are better able to take the other person's point of view. And that can only strengthen the ability to cooperate, negotiate, and compromise, okay, in a crucial way. TechTalk, in another document that is cited there, in fact says a great deal of effort in soft power goes into managing others' impressions. So bilingual and bicultural individuals become quite good at determining which responses will fit with the expectations of others. And that puts, again, privileged monolingual people at the disadvantage, right? So as Richard Rose actually puts it, knowledge of English as a foreign language does not confer soft power on Anglophones, but on Europeans using it in interactions with monoglot Americans and monoglot English speakers. So we've had these discussions in a business environment, So if you are a monolingual speaker of English negotiating across the table with a counterpart who's a non-native speaker of English, you may think that you have an advantage because you're the native speaker. In fact, they have an advantage over you because of being multilingual. Ability to prioritize. This is another thing that may come as a result of these behavioral change that happen as a result of multilingualism. So being able to understand what is more important. There's all kinds of important things, right? So you have to prioritize. You can't deal with everything at the same time. So you have to establish what needs immediate attention, what doesn't need immediate attention, and so on. Again, Nye puts it, as a paradox of plenty. So technological advances, for example, have led to an explosion of information, and that has produced a paradox of plenty. So attention rather than information becomes a scarce resource. Remember we mentioned attention as one area that is benefited, enhanced by bilingualism and multilingualism. And those who can distinguish valuable information from background clutter gain power. So again, this is, he refers specifically to soft power, but it seems to me that you can apply similar arguments, to the wider discussion on cultural relations. We've been dealing with legislative drafting recently. That's another very interesting area, where, for example, drafting bills at the EU, okay? Drafters are communicators, ultimately. And so drafters, legislation, at this level, has to be usable by different groups. It has to be clear. It has to be unambiguous and usable by different groups. So that requires, in this domain too, anticipating how the legislation is going to be received, interpreted, and the impact it might have. So again, this is another area where multilingualism can actually bring advantages. So, to conclude, because I can't go on forever, so multilingualism can lead to better cultural relations beyond the obvious ability of mastering different languages and being able to talk to more people, because the multilingual brain can operate in a way that can directly benefit cultural relations, and seeing what you normally don't see. One of the speakers, I think it was you, right, who mentioned this, right? The ability to see what you don't normally see. That may also come from being multilingual. And that's what we're trying to do. This is a center I started 10 years ago as a local service to parents and teachers, and then it became a big enterprise because we try to bridge the gap between research on multilingualism and society, very different sectors of society. So we deal with families, educators, policymakers, health professionals, and businesses, the whole lot. Because all these people have to make decisions on multilingualism, whether it's their children or their students or their patients or their citizens. So they have to make decisions that are often based on misconceptions rather than research or facts. So we try to make research, as I was saying before, accessible to people, even people with very little education. We talk to migrants who just arrived to the UK. They don't speak any English at all, but we want to persuade them not to give up their language, because that's what they tend to do, or they are advised to do directly by various people. So if they keep their language, their child will learn English, or whatever the language of the community is, without sacrificing family communication, traditions, and the benefits of bilingualism. So we now have a large international network, 23 branches, all over Europe. We have 2 in Germany, and I opened one, the last one in Tübingen in July. We have another one in Constance, so the same region of Germany. There is some interest in Berlin now. We'll see if we can go there. North America, United States, we may be opening one in Canada before long. We are in the Middle East, and we are soon going to China in April, if they don't change their mind again. And these are our partnerships and collaborations, mainly in Scotland. We work with the Scottish Government directly, but we also work with many charities. We have an ongoing collaboration with the Financial Times in the domain of business, because they put us in touch with companies and chief executives and so on. And we have lots of projects. We are researchers primarily, that's what we do for a living. And we have projects funded by the European Commission. I certainly hope that this will continue after Brexit. It's all up in the air. We haven't been told that it won't continue, but nobody knows. But also many charities and funders in the UK and elsewhere. We also do stakeholders-funded projects, so we do research that is commissioned by particular stakeholders to see the effect of particular policies or particular the introduction of languages and so on and so forth. And at this point, I'd like to stop and thank you for listening. And,